Yes, hello everyone, and a great welcome to this webinar. We're just going to start out in a few minutes as people are, signing in. Yeah, and I'll just repeat myself a bit here. A great welcome to all of you. We'll be kicking off 1 minute from now. Yeah, and a very great welcome to all of you. And let me start out on this webinar. My name is Mikkel Thomasen from Smith Innovation, and we have the pleasure of hosting today's session. And in this session, we're going to look into de-risking circularity and how to unlock the market potential for circularity in the built environment. And briefly, the outset for this session is the same as for all of the activities we do in the Circular Buildings Coalition. And that is the notion that today we actually do have a lot of circular solutions, and they are getting more and more mature, but still at the same time we lack a big uptake. We need to see these solutions scaled and used to a much higher degree. And there are, of course, different barriers to circularity. Previously, it used to be lack of solutions. Previously, it was perhaps also that they were too pricey. But as the market is maturing much more and more, the situation now is more about the perceived risk of using circular principles. So for this reason, we look into how to de-risk circularity, and also the different means by which you can do that. And the overall theme is, we'd like to explore how to navigate and mitigate the perceived risk associated with implementing circular solutions as one thing. And at the other hand, we would also like to perhaps address this very big concept of risk and circularity and address different aspects of risks. And I guess the overall conclusion, without plot spoiling too much, is that different circularity products will have different kind of risks. And for that reason, we also need to have different kind of risk management strategies. So there is no silver bullet how to reduce risk for circularity. That's the bad news. I think the good news is that we do have a lot of, not silver bullets, but a lot of small bullets to address all the different aspects we need to de-risk circularity and make it as an attractive and even better, of course, than conventional materials and solutions. A slightly another way of talking about this is to say that there is no construction that is risk-free. Construction has always been prone to risks. So the challenge is not to make it risk-free, but the challenge is to increase our risk handling strategies in order to make circularity feasible. And for that, if you take the next slide, we are looking today into 3 so-called blueprint projects, that is 3 projects supported by the Circular Buildings Coalition in the first round of the Circular Buildings Coalition, and that is Tina Pallet from Circutrade, Sophia Rapstedt from the Circular Value Institute, and Dominique Campanella from Concula, which in each of them are market solutions that in different ways reduce risk and make it handleable, you might say, within the built environment. So we're going to look into these 3 strategies first with a short presentation from each of them before we turn into a panel debate and try to get into the different aspects of risk and how to have different risk mitigation strategies for all of them. I will start out with a very short introduction on the Circular Buildings Coalition, the setting in which this webinar is held. It's a coalition of 6 organizations, all in the forefront of promoting circularity and making it expand its use. And you can see the names down here at the bottom of this slide. So the overall aim is to accelerate the implementation of a circular economy. And we're doing this by creating a common language, by increasing demand for circular economy solutions, by increasing collaboration across the value chain, and by this, in general, promoting the development and uptake of scalable solutions and best practices for circularity at a systemic level. And you can read more about CBC on the webpage. You can see the reports being made, but also you could look into the different blueprint projects that is supported in the first round of the Circular Building Coalition. And I would also say that there will be another round of blueprint projects, and we'll have a very short information of that by the end of this seminar. So another reason to why you might want to hang out to the very end of this 1 hour session. So, with respect to the speakers, I mentioned them before. You'll first have the presentation from 3 blueprint projects, 3 market solutions for de-risking, and then we'll turn into the panel debate where we also will have Max Russell from Arab joining us. Arab is one of the Circular Buildings Coalition members, and I'll be moderating this session. And if you do have any questions, we'll take them along during the panel debate, and please write them in the Q&A function that you'll see on top of your screen, and then we'll try to take as many questions we can during the panel debate. So this is the introduction on our side, and I will now turn into a very short presentation from each of the 3 blueprint projects. So please, Tina, and Circular Trade. The floor is yours.
So yes, thank you so much. Thanks for the very kind introduction. So I'm Tina Payet, co-founder of Circular Trade, which is a futures trading contract and marketplace promoting the reuse of secondhand construction materials and products. So today, you will be learning about why futures trading is key to unlocking value in reused materials and boosting their take-up. We could have the next slide, please. So combating climate change in the industry is crucial. Did you know that 11% of global CO2 emissions stem from construction materials alone? Yet, if we could go to the next slide, we continue to build a city the size of Paris every week. And building anything uses embodied carbon, and the carbon clock is ticking. But that's not all. If we could go to the next slide, please. Only 1% of materials from a standard demolition process are reused, destroying value for the remaining 99% and creating over 50% of the planet's waste. We really need the industry to embrace the circular economy, but that's not happening today. We could go to the next slide. And that's mainly due to financial risks. It's more expensive to deconstruct carefully than demolish with a wrecking ball. More expensive to harvest buildings materials than send them to landfill. More expensive to store materials than to dispose of them. For an owner, preparing a building's materials for reuse by others is risky business, full of upfront investments and unknown outcomes. And on the other hand, buying reused materials rather than virgin materials can also be seen as risky business. How could you be sure of the cost and availability in advance to purchase? And how about guarantees and delivery timelines? So how do we overcome the barriers to material reuse? Can we have the next slide? The solution is to bring the power of finance to the circular economy. By assessing and assigning value to existing buildings materials and their embodied carbon early on, we can create a reliable inventory for future reuse. A new tradable asset class is born. Our innovative futures trading contract and marketplace mitigates risks and unlocks value. With known costs, timelines, and revenues, we revolutionize the industry's approach to material reuse, promoting resource and energy efficiency. And that's, sorry, finished. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Tina. That was short and brief, and I'm so happy we have the panel discussion, but because clearly there are more things to dig into in this aspect. But we'll go on with the next presentation from you, Sophie.
Yes, hello everyone. Very interesting topic for this webinar. So I'm Sophie, I'm the co-founder of Circle Value Institute. We're a non-profit organization based in Belgium, and our goal is to optimize circular business models using the Circle Value Index. The next slide, please. So we have developed a method which is a formula based on three main indicators. And the formula is developed mainly for producers of circular materials, and it gives an indication whether their product has potential to be adopted in a circular business model. The formula consists of three main topics, which is the residual value, which can be calculated by the maximum of the emotional value, the second-hand value, or the resource value. And it is divided by the sum of the costs that are needed to calculate the cost of reuse, which is very important. So if you calculate the cost of reuse by calculating all the costs for demounting, quality check, repairing check, eventually transport, storage, and sales costs or disposal, then you can have an idea of the cost of reuse. And then we multiply it by risk factor. This risk factor is mainly because financial institutes, investors are very risk averse and are very interested in what can go wrong, which is also the topic of this webinar. So for us, this risk factor is depending on loss, toxicity, trends, producer, whether a product is custom made or not, and whether there are tech solutions incorporated in the product. So if you calculate this index, you have an abstract number, which is somewhere between 0 and 6 up to 10. And this indicates whether you can have an interesting circular business model. So this indicates, for example, if your circular value index is 0, then it's probably a product that is used in a linear economy, so that is just developed, used, and then waste. But if you have a higher circular value index, it is suitable for take back and recycle, or when it's higher, then it can be used in a leasing model, a buyback model, or even a circular discount model where you give a discount in front. So this is a way that we use for mainly for producers of materials to evaluate whether their product is has a circular value or not. So we really integrate the financial aspect because, we really believe that this financial aspect is a very important aspect in circular economy. So we are a non-profit organization, and we are also scaling up and accelerating by searching other partners who believe in this way of thinking. So I think that's the main message I wanted to give.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Sophie. And could you just, before we proceed, could you give an example of a number calculated for a specific item, just to
yes.
To put,
okay.
Yeah.
So, for example, so we have the demountable walls of Uno, which is a Belgian product for demountable walls in offices. They have, I think they have a circular value index of more than 10. Because they have a second-hand, they have a very high second-hand value because they take the walls back at the end of the life cycle, and the sum of the cost is very low because it's made to dismantle and to reuse, which makes that the sum of all the costs that are needed to demount and to reuse the walls are low, and that the initial price and also the take back price is high enough, which makes it a very interesting product to integrate in a circular business model. In this case, they have a circular discount, so there is a certain amount that is given in discount in front, which will be paid back afterwards.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, it is. Well, at least on my side. But thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, really, Sophie. And Dominic, turning towards Concula, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot also for being here. Yeah, I want to present the reclaimed construction material insurance, but quickly about Concula. So Concula is a leading digital ecosystem for circular construction, especially in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And if you go to the next slide, we are around 70 people, have like offices all around Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and are working with the large building owners, public and private. And what we are basically doing is, of course, for new buildings, doing building resource passports, but especially also for deconstruction, we're doing so-called pre-demolition audits, meaning we look what's in the building before the building is getting deconstructed, and then we are bringing these materials back into the loop, because, as already said, only 1% of the materials are reused today, and we make it possible that this 1% is going up to like 40, 50, 60%. A big challenge on that is very often, if you buy these materials, the lack of insurance. And if you go to the next slide, this is what we did in this Circular Building Coalition project. We created a reclaimed construction material insurance. So insurance only catered to reclaimed construction materials. And we not did that alone, but we did it together with the largest insurance company in Germany called VHV Versicherung. And basically how that works, I show on the next slide, is that so we have a building. This building is getting dismantled. Let's say we talk about bricks, but this can be applied to any type of construction material. And then Concula or any other, so it's not a Concula insurance, it's like insurance everyone can do in Germany, is then looking at the quality of the material, and then is basically selling these materials. So we are selling the material, but with this material, we also giving a warranty, and this warranty is then back insured by VHV Versicherungen and is then put into the building. And so we're saying, for example, this is a brick. It's perfect to put it outside in a wall. It's put into the building. Now, let's say after 2 years, you see that the water goes through a wall and there's like a damage in the wall. So this is a clear issue of like the building material quality. And in that case, the insurance would then replace this damage. And so basically you would go to Concula saying this is a damage, as you would go to like a manufacturer, and then we take care about the damage. And you get like, again, like what you had before, a good wall, and everything is clear, and everyone is happy. And with this insurance, of course, we have no difference anymore between a new construction material and a reclaimed material. However, there is a difference, and the difference is nowadays a lot of construction companies are going bankrupt. But even if like Concula or any other company is getting bankrupt, it's back insured by VHV, and they are existing for 150 years, and they will exist also for the next 150 years. So it's even better than new materials. And you can also download the paper on our website, but also the CBC website. And looking forward to discuss that further. You can go to the next slide. You can also contact me, of course, if you need any more information about that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dominic. Yeah, and just for the information to the audience, VHV Versicherung, I'm trying to speak German here. It's a rather large insurance company in Germany, isn't it?
It's the largest. So basically 80 to 90% of all construction projects and also architecture offices are insured by this insurance. So basically with this provider, we cover almost every construction project in Germany. But also, I mean, we don't only have here German-based people. So we're also talking with Austria, with Switzerland, with the UK, and also with France on bringing this whole concept also to other countries, because this could be basically applied to any country of the world.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. We'll now turn into the more general debate. And please, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A in top. It's easier to keep track on our side. And in the first round, it's a bit of a clarification among the panelists. And Dominic, perhaps I could start with you, just in a continuation of your presentation. And now you have made this insurance solutions for bricks and Germany. Do you see any obstacles to move into other products and also other markets than the German markets?
Yeah. So this question is actually twofold. So do we see obstacles on the product category and in terms of geographical expansion? Taking the first question, so if you like in the paper, we also explained that. So we are basically categorizing materials into 3 categories. The first is like low risk materials. These are, for example, like bricks which you're not using like for like statical reason or like lightnings and so on. Then a medium risk category, which could be like facade elements and so on. And then high risk, where like there are statical or like fire resistance things to prove like fire resistant doors. And what we can see is like we don't have any issues of taking materials in the first and the second category, because here you can assess the risk quite good. And the third category is a bit more challenging, like fire resistant doors and so on. But also here we're making right now progress with the insurance to also ensure that. So this is not a big issue. I would say in Germany around 90% of all materials are covered by that now. But geographical expansion is something challenging. Why? Because insurances are working different in different countries. Like insurance for a building in Germany is different than insurance in France or in the UK. And so the specifics have to be adapted. However, I think what we do with this project is we give inspiration to like a lot of other insurance companies in other countries. So what we want to say is like, it works in Germany, why should it not work in France or the UK? And so we hope and we see that other insurance companies are starting to think about it and creating this insurance, and without also our involvement, which is great. We see that there's now progress on the market.
And we have one question in the Q&A regarding the VHV Versicherung. Where's the reuse of the brick in this example? Isn't it more dealing with a complaint? So could you...
Sorry, maybe it was not clear. So the brick, is it an existing building? We take the brick, really taking it out, deconstructing it, we refurbishing it, so we make it clean, we put it into another building. That is the reusing part. And so, of course, we do quality checks, but maybe there is some issue in some of the bricks, because if you have like 50,000 bricks, you will not check every of these 50,000 bricks. You will check maybe 20, 30, and then you apply it to the whole 50,000. And there might be some which are then getting broken or so, and then the insurance would cover that. So so the reusing part is we only reuse materials. There's no new materials in that case. And and the damage would come because you will not test every material. But you will always have a sample size from which you would then do that on the whole batch of materials.
Mm-hmm. And one more question before we turn to some of the other presenters. Dominic, I would imagine having this agreement with the insurance company was a big deal on your side. How did you manage to get that actually?
It's a big deal, because I would say a young company is working differently than like a very big insurance company, and like in terms of risk, everything is about risk. But how did we were able to manage that is that we just showed them what kind of market opportunity is. So I mean, we're talking about a market only in Germany about 20 billion euro per year. In Europe, we're talking about 60 billion euro of materials which are sold every year, only in the European Union. UK is not included. It's also a large market. So, and if only a fraction of that, I mean, aim of the European Union is to have half of these circular until 2030. So we're talking about a lot of money and a huge business opportunity for insurance companies. And this is how we got them. I just showed them what is for an opportunity, and if they are the first movers, they will get, of course, take care about this opportunity. And there's also a lot of their insurance takers who are demanding that the whole time. I mean, the industry is now changing to circular economy. So, I mean, they were happy that we are supporting them with a lot of data, knowledge, and so on. And so that was a really good, or is a really good partnership with them, because they can benefit, and of course we also can benefit, and in the end our environment can benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. And one last question, and that is from Max Russell. Does the insurance what is actually insured? Is it just a replacement of the individual brick, or is it the very cost of reconstruction? I mean, if you have to take everything down and build up a wall anew and so on.
This is a really good point. So, so in a normal insurance for new materials, only the material is insured normally. So this insurance is insuring the material, so it would replace the material, but it is going much wider. So it also insures the process of putting the materials into the building. So if there's a damage, they also take care about getting out the old materials and getting in the new materials. So the whole process to restore the state of the building which was intended. That is basically what insurance takes place. So it's even better than insurance for new materials. And so there's just one catch. Which is, I mean, sometimes these reclaimed materials are not available anymore. So for bricks, it's not a problem, but imagine there's a material which is quite unique and you cannot replace that material anymore because it just does not exist. I mean, that is also the case for new materials after some years, right? And then they would give you a new material instead of reclaimed materials. But of course, first we would search for the same reclaimed material.
And do you actually pay more or less for a new brick compared to a reused one?
Also quite interesting because we did a lot of data analysis when, like, how high is the risk that the reclaimed material is getting damaged. And they showed a graph on like new materials, where is the risk? And the risk is in the first year, and then because in the production of new materials, there might be a mistake. And then in the first year of an insurance, they see like the production damage. Or in the last year, because people remember there is like insurance which will be ending soon. Now, for a reclaimed material, there is no production damage anymore because it was already in the building. So it showed it's a good quality, meaning calculating the risk, reclaimed material has a lower risk to have a damage than a new material. And now looking at the premium for the insurance, we see they put the same premium for new than a reclaimed material. Also for them, of course, they can make more money because there's less claims they will get. But in the end, it's the same price. Also, you will have much less claims looking at the data.
Okay, thanks a lot. And Tina, I would like to go back to you and the very initial presentation, because as we have learned here today, there are at least 3 different ways of reducing risk. One is to have an insurance solution, as we just heard about. Another thing is to have a risk valuation calculation model, as Sophie was presenting. But what you're presenting in a way seems very obvious, but also at first hand a bit surprising that you can actually build a market for the future value of construction materials. Could you elaborate a bit on what kind of risk is this future trading actually, and in particularly offsetting, and how does it do that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mikhail, for the question. And you know, I think what we don't realize today, the risk of why are we not reusing more materials? And a lot of it is because the owner of the building that needs to have it stripped out or demolished actually doesn't have any visibility on what the materials that are forming their building today, what they are, no identification. They also don't have any idea what they're worth, how much carbon they contain, how much they could be bought for, and they have no idea if anyone's interested in them. And so what is business as usual is just to give it to a demolition contractor and ask them to please clear everything out. Of course, responsibly, trying to avoid, landfill. But the reality is that most of the practices for those materials are just, downcycling in the best cases, and sometimes incineration, sometimes landfill. So the real risk there is for the owner. For me, the real risk is for the owner to actually invest upfront in all of that extra time and money to get those materials to a state where they can be reused. Now, why do I always say they need to be in a recertified or requalified, reconditioned state? is that today materials that are taken as is and they haven't been verified, they haven't been recertified in some cases, aren't worth very much. No one really wants to take them on as a large, for a large project, because the risk is, let's take light fixtures. If you just take a bunch of light fixtures off of a site and you have them reinstalled, you're probably going to you get the light fixtures as is at the last minute. They've just been taken out of a building. You have no idea what their specification is. They haven't been designed into your project. They have no guarantee. And so what happens? You spend a lot of money installing them, and maybe they malfunction after just a couple of weeks or months, or maybe after a year. No one wants to take that risk. So on the design construction side, there's also a huge risk in using materials, reusing materials that don't have, and I think we've seen Dominique's example there, that don't have any form of warranty or guarantee or certification. And so what we need is more time in advance. We need to advance plan. So for the designers and developers, contractors, they need to be able to prescribe these materials way in advance. Lots of these projects take 2-3 years to build out. They need to be able to prescribe them in advance and be sure that what they're specifying, I'm sorry, the term is specifying them in advance, are actually materials that are worthy to be specified. So I think what futures trading does is it takes the risks on the seller side and the risks on the buyer side and matches them up, gives enough time and visibility to make those risks disappear. All of a sudden, you want to invest 100 in certifying and reconditioning a light fixture, but you've already sold it on for 200, so it's fine. You've got 100 upside. I'm just using some wide numbers here. They're not too far from the reality, however. So that's the sort of idea that we're looking at.
And do you expect, because Dominic, he kind of split out in 3 different product categories, depending on how high the risk were or is, do you expect this future market solution to go for all products, or will it be particularly suited for certain asset classes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I've seen today, the projects that we've worked on right now have been mainly fit out projects, so fit out materials. But I do foresee, and in fit out materials, some of the what I call the low hanging fruits, which are really quite easy to reissue and to recertify, are things like raised flooring. Okay. Then you have even less technical things that are quite easy to reuse, but obviously not being reused today. Things like carpet tiles. And then you have things that are a bit more complicated to reuse and need quite a bit of remanufacturing as well. Things like light fixtures, but totally possible. So, and then you go to in the structural materials where you have an even more sort of complex recertification process and very specific structural needs. So, different sized, if it's glulam, timber, or if it's structural steel, it really has to fit the exact use case. Otherwise, you're just using too much steel, and it's just going to weigh more on the building structure. So those are how I see sort of structural materials, totally possible, and I'm working with. I have partners. So the way it works with CircoTrade is we have a certain number of partners that work with our platform and actually propose services as a third party to recondition, recertify these materials. And I have them in all categories. So we're going from the easiest category all the way up to, things like furniture, carpet tiles, and then going through to things like partition walls, hung ceilings, and going all the way to the structural materials, so and facade materials. So those are the sort of 3 categories I see.
And I think it's quite interesting that you're also looking into the structural elements, because I think for quite a while we have seen markets for visible parts but not the structural elements. And if we also look into this from a carbon reduction perspective, and which is really a driving force, or should be a driving force for circularity, we really need to get into the structural elements, because that's where a lot of carbon is used when we have to use new building materials.
Absolutely. So I would say obviously, I think that I can't remember the stat exactly, but a large portion of the carbon, probably it's almost like 60 to 70% of the carbon is in the structural materials. So it's a big piece. And then one portion that I hadn't talked about is everything that has to do with the sort of more detailed mechanical, electrical equipment, distribution equipment. And while today there are remanufacturers and recertifying of things like major plant equipment, when it comes to HVAC distribution equipment, things like fan coil units, et cetera, very difficult to get those recertified for reuse. So a lot of that sort of equipment, which has an incredible amount of CO2, you're right on that, Mikkel, is that a lot of those materials are actually going to scrap metal. Now, there are some countries that are starting to have, for domestic appliances, really good sort of guarantees on those. And I'd be interested if Dominique has any answers on HVAC equipment with the insurances he's working with. But it's been a tricky one. I think the market is going to grow there. I think there's a huge demand for it, but it's still early days in the markets that I'm practicing in.
Okay,
maybe I can. Can I say something to HVAC?
Yeah, indeed. Dominic, take it away, please.
It's Tina, it's a really, really interesting space. I mean, I can only say it for the German market, and there was like an event like 2 weeks ago, like with Arup and so on, where we exactly talked about the reuse of HVAC. I think there is a good and a not so good thing about HVAC. HVAC is normally the maintenance of HVAC is, especially in Germany, normally very good. So there's like test checks, and you have like a very good documentation, and like the experience is, the better the documentation, the higher the probability that you can bring that material back. But the other thing is that depending on the type of HVAC, sometimes if it's too old, it's not any more efficient and so on. But we from Concla, we sell a lot of HVAC. So if it's good maintained, if there's all the documentation, we sell a huge amount of HVAC. It has a high value. We insure also this HVAC. That's normally not a problem. Because of the high value, you can also do a lot of checks and quality checks of the HVAC. And with that, it's possible. So especially like, not to say like climate, so for like, sorry, I don't know now the English words, but yeah, there's a lot of good, interesting HVAC to sell.
And so, Dominique, just a question on that: who actually does those verifications and checks? Do you have third-party sort of suppliers who actually undertake that and are specialized in reused equipment?
So I mean, in general, there's like for different materials, different methods. For example, for bricks, we go like to an independent institution, and they test it by the specific standard, European standard. For HVAC, what we normally do is we work together with craft people who are specialized in HVAC. I mean, there's not a lot of craft people who are specialized in the reuse of these materials, but they know how HVAC should work, for example, and they can check HVAC and the documentation and everything if it's like a new a machine and so on. And with that, we normally work together. You have to build up this network, and basically for every material we have a different method and different people, different companies. So I mean, I think this is where the complexity also comes in then.
Yes.
And I mean, it's growing more and more, but in my opinion, take the people who also put in the materials and check. They should check because they want that these materials are good. So they will also check thoroughly that they are good.
If I can just come in on the HVAC while we're on it as well, and I think it's a really interesting, what Tina and Dominic have highlighted as well. One of the interesting factors, across the different elements of a building and the built environment, but maybe particularly conducive in terms of the services layer, is circular business models as well. and it's helping to realign some of those incentives. So when you're talking about all of those kind of complex steps that need to be kind of put together in order to recertify, etc., who gets that incentive? Most customers want the assurance that they're getting the best quality product that can perform at the desired standards. And some movements in relation to circular business models, particularly product as a service, offering lighting as a service, cooling as a service, for example, can help to really have the scale that's required to ensure that those reuse products. So I'm the owner, and rather than having a single point sale of that HVAC system or that cooling system, I lease it out to different clients. I maintain that particular ownership, but then I can, once it's done with that first use, I can then reuse it, and I'm incentivized because I can extract additional value through that. So in terms of de-risking it, that helps to de-risk from the customer's perspective, providing that assurance that I will be receiving a product of a certain quality and a certain need that I'm being fulfilled. But it also is able to kind of support that scale that's required in terms of that warranty, the validation, the checks as well. So, services and also in relation to their replacement cycles are quite conducive for elements like product as a service, these circular business models as well, helping to really align some of those environmental benefits of reuse with the value that can be created through reuse as well.
And Max and Sophie, we're going to come back to you in a while, but Max, could you, because what we talk about here is that for different kind of products, we'll need different kind of products will have different kind of risk profiles, and for that reason, we need different kind of risk mitigation strategies. So there is no single solution, but there is a portfolio of solutions that we can use to reduce risk. But Max, do you, from a carbon reduction potential perspective, what are the most important market for reuse and recycling to move into, and what is still the most difficult one in order to really reduce carbon loads from new build materials?
Yeah, that's a really good one, and I guess it's where do you cut the cloth on that? And there's an argument to be made for embodied carbon. Which materials have the greatest A1 to A5 embodied carbon in terms of their manufacturing, but it's also whole life carbon perspective as well when you're thinking about some elements in terms of fit out and HVAC and the services layer. That's often underappreciated and under-recognized because of that replacement cycle through the whole life of a building. I completely agree that one solution is maybe more conducive or more supportive for a particular material than another, as you mentioned, Michiel, in relation to that particular risk profile. Tina, you were highlighting about the structural components. Obviously, with Dominic's example of a brick, if a brick faults, then you have a little bit of that kind of backup and you can be able to replace it. It's maybe not kind of holding the entire building up, but if a steel beam faults, which is structural, then the consequences are much more significant. In relation to embodied carbon, we know where some of those really key hotspots are. Steel, metals, steel, aluminium are really core elements or really key hotspots in relation to embodied carbon of buildings. And I think steel is perhaps a particularly interesting one from the perspective of it's a material that can be readily and infinitely reused as well. So in terms of that reuse potential, there's really great potential there. In terms of a carbon reduction potential, there is also great potential as well. Reused steel could be up to 80% lower embodied carbon than a virgin alternative or a freshly made alternative as well. I guess where that risk profile comes in is making sure that one that has that certification and that warranty. And I know that in the UK, at least, there isn't a distinction between kind of reused and newly made. They both need to be certified, and they both need to go through that certification process as well. So there are those processes already in place that can provide that assurance and provide that kind of reassurance in relation to the structural integrity of that reused steel. I guess one of the challenges with steel, as Tina was kind of highlighting before, is being such a core pivotal element within the structure of a building. it's that programming, and it's making sure that it's specified early enough, that engagement happens early enough within the design phase, so that you don't have to you can design a building in a most effective way that can incorporate that reuse still, which is a different risk in itself. It's a financial risk. Where do you store that still once it gets released from one building into another? Nikhil, I see you have your hand. Go for it.
Well, because we have a question which I think is also leading towards a general question, and then we'll come back to you, Sophie. But the question goes like, are these risks real, or are they exaggerated by the conventional industry? And in a way, we also try to allude to that when we in the introduction talk about perceived risks of circularity. I know it's a broad question, but is it true that you might sometimes over-exaggerate the risk of circularity compared to the risk of new materials? And Tina, you also seem to have a comment on that one, I guess. And Dominic, you have a raised hand on that one, I guess. So Dominic, please.
Tina, right?
Okay, Tina first.
Okay, I'll go first. It'll be quick. I mean, I think we are seeing, actually, if you look at an existing building, which may be a heritage building, it may, have materials that are hundreds of years old. There seems to be no issue when you're reusing the building, in actually retaining those materials, and they don't give rise to much worry or even assurances required. But as soon as any of those materials are moved out of their in situ location, it seems to be becoming an entirely much more perceived risk there. And I mean, I'll take the case even in something that's not a historical building, things like fire doors. If you want to move your fire door from one side of your building to another side within the same building, it's very rare, at least in the UK, what I've been seeing, and in France, it's very hard to get those recertified as a fire door. And it seems ridiculous that that's the case because, it's in the same context, and they can obviously be checked for air tightness and, et cetera. So I think there is some overblown, as the question is asking, there is a bit of that. But Dominique, over to you.
Yeah, I want to agree, Tina. So maybe also the insurance. I mean, we can also give like the insurance by our company, and like every manufacturer or like construction company is giving their own insurance. They don't have it even back insured. So like what we did is we created insurance which is going way beyond actually what is a new product. Because there is only the perceived risk. I mean, I showed you like even like the statistics show that reclaimed materials have a lower risk of getting a damage than a new material. And I mean, we like there was no reason to give an insurance in terms of legal aspects and so on. There is no need for an insurance, but we did it because there's a perceived risk. So we did something which is actually not necessary, but because we do it, people think differently about that, and that changes the market. But if you think about it, that's actually, yeah, it's not necessary in the end. And also giving you, for example, also a brick. If you want to bring in a brick, like with certification, you have to check for water permeability. So like, I mean, you have to check like if a brick is breaking in the winter, if it's getting very cold. So a brick which was in a building for 70 years, which have shown 70 times, 70 winters that this is not breaking, now you have to bring it into a laboratory to check if this is really not breaking. I mean, it kind of already showed like in 70 times that it's not a problem, but you still have to check it because some people think it's important. And for example, we say we are sure that, I mean, that's half of the cost of the testing is just checking that aspect. And so we never test that because we know that it's not a problem. And also legally, this is not a problem to not check it, but there's this perceived risk which is very often just a myth from the industry. But yeah, in the end, I think they're even better.
And Max, a comment on that, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, no, since we're talking about perceived risk. I guess it, on one hand, it can work, in a particular direction, as Dominic and Tina have highlighted as well. But I also feel that there's a perceived risk of inaction. And I think up until this point, that risk of not doing anything, of not using reclaimed material, not reducing embodied carbon, operational carbon, that perceived risk of inaction has been too low. And that really, is disproportionate to the perceived risk of reuse, etc. With policy and the doomsday that's heard on the news, that perceived risk of inaction, I think the scales are kind of rebalancing a little bit. The EU's taxonomy and CSRD and other frameworks, there is a risk of being inactive, both in terms of the reporting requirements in relation to carbon, but also the risk of, if we don't do this and do this quick, the impacts of climate change will be incredibly dramatic. And then, we have an insurance conversation from a very, very different angle.
Yeah. So you might say we have risk mitigation strategies for buildings, but not for the planet. And that is, in a way, a bit strange. Sophie, coming back to you and a question raised from Yannick 27 minutes ago. Thank you for your patience, Yannick. And for Sophie, how's residual value calculated? Can you give an example on how to translate the emotional value and risk into a metric or a weight? So how do you... Yeah, and I think it's a really great question, because it's also address a more fundamental issue here, and that is when we try to do risk management, it's always about calculations. So you need to put a number to things, but then we have the measurable and we have the meaningful, and not everything that is meaningful is measurable. So in this world of quantification and risk management, do we tend to forget the important stuff?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we want to do with the formula. Of course, it's not hard, it's no hard science or something, but it's a way to calculate certain scenarios. So when you calculate the residual value, then you assume that a certain material will have a certain value in the future. Of course, we have to predict this future, and no one is sure. But if we have more data, more information on that, it will become more easy. So I think that the coming years it will become more easy to calculate, for example, the residual value. And yeah, the formula that we have now is that it is the maximum of, for example, the emotional value. For example, steel from the Eiffel Tower will have a higher value than normal steel. So that is a possibility, but of course, if there's a second-hand market that has been developed in a good way, then there will also be a high residual value. Or when there are more producers or more systems that are taking back materials, that will also raise the residual value. And if there is none of these markets that are there, then there's always the value of the resource itself, of the virgin material itself. So that is a way to calculate it. And just if you take the maximum amount, then you have the most positive way to look at it, and you have a certain assumption of the future value of the residual value. So that is how we see it. But for example, for the risk factor, it is a scale. It's just a number between 0 and 1. And of course, that's for us also the most difficult part, because there you can assume that, for example, if there are important changes in legislation, or when something is very custom made, then it will be more risky to have this material in second life. So that is bit about, and that's also maybe an answer for us. We think that if you can calculate and if you have data, then it gives more certainty, even though you know that it will never be exactly this calculation, but it gives a certain certainty. And in that way, we also see that it's very important to fix certain scenarios. So if you can, for example, fix a scenario that a certain material will be reused in the same city, in the same market, or in a certain amount of time. So if you calculate that, for example, structural elements will be reused in 20 years, while other materials will be reused in 10 years, then you have an idea of the potential circular value that it will have. So it will never be exactly that, but it is a way to just to take certain data and to calculate, and it gives certainty. But I think that if we have the coming years more materials that will be reused, that there will be more data, like Dominic also said, it's about just doing it and having more data. And what I also wanted to stress is that it's a very important business opportunity. So if you see more people and actors reusing materials, and you see that there's actually money that can be gained by doing it, that is also a way to de-risk it, because I think if you see that the market is changing, then circular economy will evolve in a positive way, because if you really use this opportunity and see that there is money that can be gained, it's very interesting opportunity.
Thanks a lot. And we have 5 minutes left, so we have to use them carefully. But I think we have 1 or 2 questions that I think are really important. And one is raised by PK in the chat function, and it's about how to deal with this in different parts of Europe. And if I could translate that question a bit, in certain areas, in certain parts of Europe, you might have a very strong regulation enforcement, whereas you don't have it in others. So what do you do when you don't have this strong law enforcement? And my question to all 3 of you, including, or 4 of you, including you, Max, these strategies that we talk about in this seminar, which are market responses to how to mitigate strategies, can they work without very strong regulation, or are they very dependent on strong regulation? A short comment from Tina, Dominic, and perhaps also you, Sophie. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to give my first comment. I think regulation is going to be a huge support to the circular economy, but I have seen in some markets that it's also and very much driven by the corporate sort of private sector, that they themselves have signed up to net zero goals. They have, even in some cases, circularity programs that they want to be able to be proving that they are an enterprise that's worth investing in as far as their stakeholders go, and that they're respectful and building respectful buildings in which their main high-profile clients will want to be in. So there's a lot of pressure from private industry and from tenants themselves to have these buildings be more circular and the materials in them be more circular. So I think while regulation for me is a no-brainer and really needs to be there and would be very supportive, I do think that in a lot of cases, this is also being driven from the side of the corporate or the private sector. And not to mention that also sometimes without regulation, this could be very successfully driven by government procurement policies as well. So I think there's 3 angles that can be taken.
And I think that's a very important message, that even though we don't have all regulation in place, there is something that can be done bottom up. Dominic, a very short remark on this, and we do the round, and I guess then we're going to conclude.
Yeah, very short. It works without regulation. We can offer materials around 20% cheaper also, but it will be much faster with regulation. And I mean, it's not a term of us being it faster, but it's about why we're doing this, because of the climate crisis. So in terms of that, we need regulation to adapt that much faster than it's now.
Yeah, okay. And Sophie, a remark on
I just wanted to add again, the market, like if there's interesting market opportunities, then I think that will also be very important driver. So I think it's both market, but also we need legislation to speed it up.
Max, in Europe, you work with projects all around the world, and if you look at a global scale, in the short and the long term, where should we focus our energy to improve our risk mitigation strategies the most, you think? What should we target? I think you're muted.
There we go. Hopefully you can hear me now. Well, on a global scale, I mean, that's a very, very big question. I think it comes down to you know, having these kind of global principles, you know, and I guess we can kind of aggregate and summarize that, you know, the risk profiles of materials, you know, that can be globally applicable and globally relevant. But as was mentioned before, how they manifest themselves within a particular country and a particular context will vary and will change. You know, some countries, and I see in the chat, some countries, you know, a bit of a lower regulatory framework to support other countries with a much kind of greater regulatory framework. So I don't think it should necessarily be a let's prioritize region A over region B, for example. I think there are opportunities to really either, you know, ride the wave that regulation is helping to create, and also with procurement, but also in areas where there is kind of fewer demonstrations of really hard regulation. I think that really emphasizes the importance to demonstrate and prove the business case and the business model and the value that can be created. And I think that's one thing across all the different regions is really having those demonstrative benefits of de-risking to dispel those myths or those perceived risks that are there, or those perceived risk profiles as well. I think the more kind of really practical demonstrations that can serve as blueprints, and that maybe ties nicely to the kind of the blueprint projects that we have around the table today. But the more that we can really provide those tangible examples to help to dispel those myths, I think that transition will really accelerate.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Max. Thanks a lot, Sophie. Thanks a lot, Tina. And thanks a lot, Dominic. To have multiple instruments, practical, demonstrated, is important. It could be a way to end this this seminar. And I think also concluding that materials are different. There is a difference whether it's break AVAX facility or facade panel, but also that countries are different, building typologies are different. Or for that reason, we need a rather large portfolio of risk mitigation strategies. But they are there. We have discussed 3 today. Much more is around, and much more should be around. And as you were saying, Max, and if we could share the slides, we will have another round of blueprint projects, and that is project that is supported by the Circular Buildings Coalition, supported in cash with a soft funding, but also supported with network and accessibility to expertise, knowledge. And we are still in the process of framing the call for these blueprint projects, which will be announced in the early start of 2025. But our anticipation is that we will have one element about de-risking and how to make insurance solutions, future market solutions, risk value calculation solution, or whatever it takes to de-risk circularity. So thanks a lot for all of you of joining, and thanks a lot for being present, not only at this seminar, but perhaps also on the next one.